Hi guys, and welcome back to the Bird Photography Show with Glenn Bartley
Hello.
and me, Jan Wegener. So Glenn, you've come back, I think last week from a much longer than planned trip to South
Yeah.
America. So you must have taken some or a lot of great images.
Well, yeah, it was definitely a longer trip than I planned. I wound up merging two shorter trips into one really long trip, which was unplanned, but actually turned out really well. It was really productive. I started in Colombia where I was leading my annual photo workshop down there, and we just had an amazing trip. Mountain toucans, tanagers, cocks of the rock, all kinds of hummingbirds, ant pittas, and many, many other things. It was really fantastic. Everyone went home with hard drives full of images, including myself. And then after that, I flew down to Ecuador. I had about 3 weeks in Ecuador by myself. So I decided to focus on birds of the really high Andes. And one special one, the blue-throated hill star, that was only discovered in 2017, 2018. So I decided to chase after some of those birds, and again, had some great success with the hill star. I actually had a hill star hat trick where I got the Chimborazo hill star, the Ecuadorian hill star, and the blue-throated hill star. So that was really cool.
So when you come back home and you share some images, it always looks like it was all fun and games. It was pretty easy to get the birds, but is that really how it worked in the field?
Sometimes, and sometimes not. So yeah, it's a real mixed bag. I mean, for sure, if you show up at a productive set of feeders where birds are coming in, it's more or less a given that you're going to get some kind of good shots, and the quality then really depends upon your setup and how you know, the branches that you choose, and you know, obviously the time of day and lighting, and doing a really quality setup, which is something that I really try to pride myself on doing a good job of. But you kind of know you're going to get some birds coming in. And then when it comes to field photography, what I call field photography, where you're out away from feeders, there's nothing attracting the birds, you're just trying to find them and photograph them, you're much more reliant upon chance. 90% of birds don't come to feeders. So if you don't ever pursue them outside away from the lodges, you're never going to get those birds.
So then you're actually willingly giving up getting like a lot of good photos at a feeder on certain days in favor of getting more species in the field or chasing a couple more rare birds?
Sometimes it comes down to sort of that quality over quantity. I think I've spent more than 1,200 days in South America at this point photographing birds. So a lot of the common feeder birds I've got plenty of shots of. So I don't mind stepping away from those feeders.
I actually had the same experience when I was in Texas for about 6 weeks. We ended up chasing some more rarer birds. Like we got some really nice shots of a golden cheek warbler, which is like a really hard bird to get. I got some nice shots of the painted bunting that I wanted to get. But then because I was chasing specific targets, I didn't really get a lot of the other birds from the area. So now I'm really happy I have those shots, but it's only like, I might have gotten like 10 species. And if I had focused on getting easier birds, I could have probably had like 20 or 30 species. So it's definitely always this trade-off.
In this particular trip, I really wanted to photograph these black-chested mountain tanagers. The first day I was getting to that area, I got there in the afternoon. It was already pretty foggy, not the best weather, but I decided to go to the site anyways just to suss it out and see if the birds were actually coming in. I got there, I looked around, the conditions were not shootable, so I went on a big search and I found a bunch of nice branches and I just put them by the feeders, and then I just left and then decided to come back the next day. I was still trying to kind of figure out how the birds were behaving. I got some shots, but I still wanted to improve. So I came back a third morning, and that was the morning that I finally got the shots that I was after. So in that case, it kind of ultimately took basically 3 days to get the photos of those birds that I was really after.
So now we're coming home from a trip. In Glenn's case, it was 50 days, so you would have had thousands and thousands of images. And I think if you want to be efficient and color a lot of images, it's important that you kind of know exactly what kind of pose you want, what you want the bird to do. Is it the same for you? Do you have like a plan, or do you have like a pose in mind that you would want to get of that bird?
Ultimately, I want to get it down to the best of the best. So I'm trying to whittle out anything that, you know, doesn't have a good background. The lighting's not good. It's not exposed properly. Bad poses. All those things hopefully are all on the cutting room floor really easily. And you're left with a certain handful of really good shots.
I just know what is a good bird photo. But let's say someone has taken 45 images of this oyster catcher. What are we looking for? What's our first kind of checklist in our head that we go through?
Ultimately, it's up to the user as to what photo jumps out to them as being the best one. That's when you're really looking for those like qualitative things, like the perfect pose, you know, where you've just got that right head angle, the catch light in the eye, the setting is good, whether it's, you know, like you said, oyster catcher, so maybe it happens to be some really nice section of the rocks where there's some little plants or something. You know, there's those extra little bonus factors.
See, this is actually quite interesting though, and that's what I was getting at. I say oyster catcher, you have a photo in mind. So this is how our mind works a little bit. We do kind of have that perfect shot in mind, even if we don't see the photo. So that helps us in the field to look for a certain spot. For instance, you say there could be this awesome rock, so we would probably position ourselves near that rock, hoping that the bird would come to that rock to get like that perfect shot. So I think this is a very important aspect that you learn after a while. It's like seeing shots in your mind before they happen. I often see people choosing a lot of sort of suboptimal head turns. I think that's one of the main things why pictures don't look as engaging. If the bird's kind of just looking sideways or slightly away from you, it's a lot less engaging than a bird looking right at the camera, looking right at the photographer, engaging with it.
You know, you and I have looked at millions of bird photos in our lives, and so we know what we perceive to be a good photo. When we go out into the field and all of a sudden a bird's singing and we're going to start trying to photograph it, we're already thinking, okay, where's the light? Where's the background? What kind of perch? What's appropriate for this species? How am I going to try to get this bird onto my perch? And all that kind of stuff. Because we already have that photo in our mind. Even if we don't consciously have it in our mind, it's already there.
Yeah.
And that's something that with experience you do need to develop, and people never talk about this kind of thing. People talk about what's the best camera and, you know, what settings, what shutter speed, and that kind of stuff. But that stuff becomes all completely academic once you've got a bunch of experience. It's just automatic that you do those kinds of things. But the visualization and the creative process of trying to take the image that you're after is a whole nother thing that maybe not everybody kind of can get to, but I do think it's really important to strive for.
What you actually strive for can be different for every person. Like I have my style, you like for your photos a certain way. So it doesn't mean because we say this is good, mean that's the be all end all. You might like it small in the frame or big in the frame. That's different. But I think one of the most important aspects is the visualization and looking for something. Like you might look for a nice scene of the bird in the landscape when you position yourself in a certain way. Or I want it on a perch, so I'm looking for a nice perch with a nice background, and then I envision the bird sitting on there. I'm like, oh, that would be beautiful, and then I'm trying to get that. So having an idea of what you want to achieve is definitely very helpful.
One that's funny was on this Colombia trip, we were doing some field photography at one particular lodge, and I saw this amazing branch that had fallen down. I literally carried that thing back up to the lodge. We wrapped it up in garbage bags, took it to the next site, hiked it up in, set it up, and finally got the black-billed mountain toucan on this perch after literally like 4 days of having this perch, carrying it around. So that's the kind of thing, like I saw that perch and I was like, that would be perfect for the toucans.
So we might make it look easy, and when you see all the final pictures, it looks easy, but you see that there's a lot of thinking and a lot of effort involved in getting those certain shots.
And craziness.
I consider myself pretty good at image editing and I'm pretty fast, but you're just editing literally hundreds of images in a few days. So what's your secret in getting them quickly to good standard?
Well, maybe not hundreds in a few days, but definitely try to get through a bunch when I first get home from a trip. So the first key thing is organizing them sort of while you're on a trip so that when I get home, I just have the best of the best. The next thing I'm gonna do with just those keepers is I'm gonna throw the whole batch of them through DxO. The next thing, which has been a massive time saver to be honest, is processing the raw files in Adobe Camera Raw. And we created these PROSETS for exactly this purpose. Well, two purposes. We wanted to correct the colors that Adobe was doing a really bad job on, and certainly does that. But I think what we both found in the process was it just saves you a ton of time. Because now I just click on the PROSET that I want to use. It makes it look very nice. I quickly scan through them just to see if there's anything I want to tweak. But I have to, like, totally honestly, I've been surprised at how often it's just literally one click and I'm done. And I don't often change that much else on them. So the PROSETS have been a huge time saver when it comes to that phase. And then I move into Photoshop and I start working through each file. I have a general workflow action that I work through on each file. If you want to save time, you need our PROSETS. If you want to learn how to edit your photos quickly and efficiently and beautifully, you definitely want to check out my ebooks and Jan's masterclass. All of those links are down in the description. Those will save you time and help you to get the best possible results. For me, it's really important that whenever I finish a big trip like this, I really try to work hard for a couple weeks, process up the best of the best, and get them out there. And what do I mean by get them out there? Well, you know, obviously we have Instagram, we have Facebook. I still like to post on some of the more dedicated sort of photo forums that are out there. I don't post as much as I used to because, let's be honest, they're pretty dead these days. But if you want those images to look the best they can, it's really important to prepare those files a certain way for the web. What I do is, obviously I want to resize them, something like 1200 pixels or 1400 pixels. I like to put a little black border around them. I want to sharpen the files, and what I've been using lately is Topaz Sharpen for my web sharpening. And then really important is that you change the color space to sRGB. Normally in your processing, you want to use Adobe RGB 1998, but it's really important that for web, you change it to sRGB if you want the colors to be as consistent as possible. And then I save the file as a JPEG, usually quality 10. You guys know by now, I don't like wasting time in the digital darkroom. So I've written myself a nice little action.
So your action gives you the border, it puts on your little name and website at the bottom, it sharpens the file and it resizes the file, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it also saves it in the appropriate folder. So basically, it's not like a one click, like it just runs through it, because I still want to have control over the sharpening. I want to have control over where I put the signature, but everything else is automated.
One more thing, when saving for sRGB, which is very important, you also have to make sure that you actually tick the box embed color profile on the file when you're saving the file. I think resizing is also important because you can upload the larger files, but then a place like Instagram will compress them heavily, which is actually a lot worse than uploading a smaller file that doesn't get compressed as much. For me, this workflow has changed a little bit. What I've been usually doing is preparing the files for YouTube, and that's basically a full-size JPEG that I just sharpen and then save. I can leave it as Adobe RGB or sRGB, both kind of works there. So that's like a full kind of my masterpiece D file converted into a full-size JPEG file with a little bit of just smart sharpening usually. And then I like to prepare a file that's either 1500 pixel or like 1200 pixel that I save on my desktop usually. And then I'll save those images on my phone as well. I usually email them to myself, and then that's what I would post on Instagram. But I don't use any watermarks or anything there anymore. So that's pretty easy. And when it comes to actually saving for web, I usually just go into the Photoshop resizing dialog. It seems like the resizing methods in Photoshop are much better these days. So if I pick, I think it's called preserve details. If I pick that and I resize it from like a 5000 or 6000 pixel file to like a 1200 pixel file, it's usually what I would call good enough. So for the last time, I've just usually just resized it smaller. And then I usually press Control Shift Alt and S, that opens the Save for Web dialog. And in there, I just save it at 90%. You can click Convert to sRGB. So you don't even have to convert it before. You can tick that box. You can embed the color profile. You pick JPEG quality 90%, and then I just save it like that.
So two ways to get there, but it really, the key there is the sRGB.
Looking at some of the images that you brought from Ecuador in particular, they looked like they would have been pretty tricky in terms of exposure in the field as well. Like this one hill star, for instance. It's a very dark perch with a very dark background and a lot of whites on the bird. Usually the bird's not sitting there an hour for you so you can dial in all your settings, do 50 test shots. You kind of have to be ready when it fans the tail, because it won't do that for very long.
I tend to shoot aperture priority most of the time, and in this case, 100% the metered reading on that shot would have blown out the whites, for sure, right? Because the white bird is so much brighter than the rest of the scene. The camera's metering for the average, and the bird is way brighter than the average. So you would certainly blow the bird out if you just took a shot at the metered reading. I've kind of trained myself to always be looking for that anomaly. So if I see a really bright bird or a bird that has a white patch or something like that on a very dark scene, I know that immediately I need to dial in some negative exposure compensation. Getting the right amount of negative exposure compensation is something that kind of comes with experience, because you're kind of trying to gauge like how dark is the background. The background's dark, how dark, and how far away from the average is your sort of bird, in this case, likely to be. It's good to have some blown out parts. Like a little bit blown out is actually the perfect exposure that'll allow you to recover that on the raw file. But what you don't want is like completely blown out.
And so did you meter something else? Because you're using evaluative metering. Some people might say, why don't you use spot metering? But I think with spot metering, a problem is often that you then get the whole image too dark, especially if you're using something like auto ISO. Because if you're metering the bright spot, it might go extremely dark, and then it's very hard to recover the whole image.
And we're going to be starting a brand new segment on this show called Bird Photography Fundamentals. It's going to be a separate video that's going to come out very soon. And in that first fundamentals video, we're going to be talking all about exposure and the concept of exposing to the right. So stay tuned for that, where we'll get into much more detail on this subject. In this case, I was kind of set up for failure, because where I actually wanted the bird to go was at this patch of these Chugirawa flowers, which had like a lighter background, and that's what I was actually trying to get. And the bird flew in kind of behind me. I was set up for the wrong settings where I actually wanted him, but when I turned around, I kind of recognized what was going on with the overall settings and just dialed in a bit more negative compensation.
See, that's one of the reasons why I like shooting manual, for instance, because then usually when I'm dialed in on manual on the bright side, I don't even have to change anything if it goes to the dark side, because it will still expose the bird properly. But I think you're saying something important, and that's what I do as well, obviously even more so when shooting manual, is that while you're moving your camera onto something, I'm actually thinking in my mind, what's my exposure going to be like? Is it brighter? Is it going to be darker? What's going to happen? So by the time I'm on the bird with the camera, I have the correct exposure. And I usually just go by clicks on the wheel. I know that I do my shutter speed for the manual mode on the rear wheel. So I know 3 clicks is 1 stop. And then I often just go like 3 clicks or 6 clicks. And I know if I swing over to something brighter, 3 clicks, I should still have the right exposure.
Well, everyone, I think that just about does it for this episode. Hopefully you picked up a few tips about exposure and saving things for web. Be sure to check out our PROSETS if you really want to save time in the digital darkroom, and we'll see you in the next episode.
And like always, please give us a thumbs up for the video. It really helps us with the algorithm. Let us know in the comments your thoughts about the episode, and subscribe to the channel, and we will see you guys in the next episode very soon. Bye.
See you next time.